The man who had everything woke up with nothing, not even his name. As Alexander Reed stared at his reflection in the hospital mirror, the face looking back was a stranger's. If you've ever wondered what it would be like to restart your life with a clean slate but all the resources in the world, stay with me. This story might just change how you see wealth, memory, and the connections that truly matter. If you find yourself moved by Alexander's journey, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. Alexander Reed had been one of Boston's most ruthless real estate developers. His name adorned half a dozen gleaming skyscrapers that transformed the city's skyline. His net worth exceeded 9 figures. His reputation for cutthroat business tactics preceded him into every boardroom. But none of that mattered now as he sat on the edge of a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors who kept asking him simple questions he couldn't answer. What year is it, Mr. Reed? Who is the current president? Do you recognize this woman? The woman they referred to stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed tightly across her designer blouse, her face a mask of controlled distress. According to the doctors, she was Caroline Reed, his wife of 15 years. I'm sorry, Alexander said, meeting her gaze. I don't know you. The accident had been catastrophic, a head-on collision on the Massachusetts Turnpike during a blizzard. Alexander had been clinically dead for 4 minutes before paramedics revived him. The traumatic brain injury had wiped his autobiographical memory clean while leaving his semantic knowledge intact. He could explain how the stock market worked but couldn't remember ever investing in it. He could read and write and speak, but had no recollection of learning these skills. Retrograde amnesia, the neurologist explained. Quite severe. He's lost his episodic memories, his personal history, but retained his procedural memory and general knowledge. Will he recover? Caroline asked, her voice tight. The doctor's hesitation said everything. Sometimes memories return gradually. Sometimes, they don't. 3 weeks later, Alexander was discharged from the hospital. Caroline drove him to a penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor that apparently belonged to them. Everything about it, the minimalist furniture, the abstract art, the floor-to-ceiling windows, felt foreign to him. This is home? He asked. Caroline nodded stiffly. One of them. We have the house in Nantucket, the ski lodge in Aspen, and the villa in Tuscany. Alexander wandered through the apartment, trailing his fingers over surfaces that should have felt familiar but didn't. In the study, he found a wall of photographs, evidence of a life he couldn't remember living. Wedding photos. Vacation snapshots. Business award ceremonies. I look unhappy, he observed, studying his own face in the pictures. Even in the wedding photos, his smile seemed forced, his eyes cold. Caroline appeared in the doorway. You were always focused on the next deal, the next acquisition. You used to say happiness was a distraction. That sounds terrible. That was who you were. The past tense wasn't lost on Alexander. The man in those photographs was gone. What remained was a shell with no history, no connections, no purpose. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to reacquaint himself with his life. Caroline arranged meetings with his business partners, his attorney, his financial advisor. They showed him spreadsheets and contracts, explained his various holdings and investments. He nodded and pretended to understand, but inside he felt hollow. One night, unable to sleep in the king-sized bed that felt too large and too empty, Caroline had moved into the guest room. Alexander slipped out of the penthouse. It was past midnight, the city quieter than during the day but still humming with life. He walked without direction, just needing to move, to feel something other than the persistent emptiness. His wandering took him to the public garden. Even in the darkness, it was beautiful, a pocket of nature amid the urban landscape. Alexander sat on a bench, watching the moonlight play on the surface of the lagoon. Rough night? The voice startled him. A young woman stood a few feet away, her clothes worn and layered against the spring chill. She carried a backpack that looked stuffed to capacity. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were clear and intelligent. "I suppose you could say that," Alexander replied. "Mind if I sit? My feet are killing me." He gestured to the empty space beside him. "Be my guest." The young woman dropped onto the bench with a sigh of relief. "I'm Lily, by the way." "Alexander. At least, that's what they tell me." Lily gave him a curious look. "That's cryptic." Perhaps it was the anonymity of the night, or the fact that Lily was a stranger with no expectations of who he should be, but Alexander found himself telling her everything: the accident, the amnesia, the strange experience of living a life that felt like someone else's. "So you're a millionaire with no memories," Lily summarized when he finished. "That's wild." "What about you?" Alexander asked. "Why are you out here so late?" Lily's smile faded. "Because out here is where I live. The shelters are full, and some of them aren't safe anyway." "You're homeless?" "I prefer residentially challenged," she said with a wry smile. "But yeah, for about 8 months now." Alexander felt a surge of shame at his own circumstances. Here he was, complaining about his penthouse and multiple homes, while Lily had nowhere to sleep but a park bench. "What happened?" he asked. "If you don't mind telling me." Lily shrugged. "The usual story. Lost my job when the restaurant I worked at closed. Couldn't make rent. Roommates couldn't cover for me. Once you're out, it's nearly impossible to get back in. No address means it's hard to get a job. No job means no money for an address. It's a vicious cycle." They talked until the sky began to lighten. Lily told him about her life before homelessness, her dream of becoming a chef, the culinary courses she'd taken before running out of money, the family she'd lost touch with out of shame. Alexander found himself captivated by her resilience, her humor in the face of hardship. As dawn broke, Alexander made a decision. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "I need someone to help me figure out who I am, or who I want to be. And you need a place to stay. Maybe we can help each other." Lily looked skeptical. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I have an empty guest house on the property in Nantucket. You can stay there, help me navigate this new life, and in return, you'll have a safe place to live while you get back on your feet." "Why would you trust a homeless stranger?" Alexander smiled. "Because right now, everyone's a stranger to me. At least you've been honest about who you are." After some persuasion and a promise that she could leave any time, Lily agreed. Caroline was less enthusiastic when Alexander returned to the penthouse and explained his plan. "You want to move a homeless person into our guest house?" she asked incredulously. "Have you lost your mind along with your memory?" "Maybe I have," Alexander replied calmly. "Or maybe I'm finding a new one." The truth, which neither of them acknowledged aloud, was that their marriage had been failing long before the accident. The amnesia had simply made it impossible to maintain the pretense. 2 weeks after Alexander's midnight encounter with Lily, Caroline filed for divorce. "I can't compete with a ghost," she said. "The man I married is gone, and I don't think I want to know this new version." The divorce proceedings revealed much about the man Alexander had been. Cold. Calculating. Ruthless in business and apparently equally so in his personal life. The prenuptial agreement Caroline had signed left her with a settlement that was generous by normal standards but a pittance compared to Alexander's fortune. "You always said sentiment was expensive," his attorney explained when Alexander questioned the terms. "You protected your assets aggressively." Alexander found himself increasingly uncomfortable with his former self's decisions. While the divorce was being finalized, he and Lily moved to the Nantucket property, a sprawling beachfront estate that could comfortably house a dozen people but had apparently rarely entertained guests. True to her word, Lily became Alexander's guide to his new life. She helped him sort through his possessions, explaining the significance of items he couldn't remember acquiring. She accompanied him to medical appointments and business meetings, taking notes and helping him make sense of the complex web of his financial empire. But more importantly, she showed him how to live simply. They cooked meals together in the massive kitchen that had previously been used only by hired chefs for occasional dinner parties. They walked on the beach, collecting shells and watching the sunset. They planted a vegetable garden, Lily drawing on knowledge from her culinary background. "You know," she said one evening as they sat on the deck watching the waves, "for a guy who lost everything, you seem happier than most people who have it all." Alexander considered this. "Maybe because I'm not trying to hold on to anything. When you start with nothing, not even memories, everything feels like a gift." As months passed, Alexander began making changes to his business empire. He halted development projects that would have displaced low-income residents. He established a foundation to address homelessness in Boston, with Lily as its director. He donated one of his buildings to be converted into affordable housing. His business partners thought he'd lost his mind. His financial advisors warned him about diminishing returns. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, Alexander felt like he was building an identity he could be proud of. Lily flourished in her new role. Her first-hand experience with homelessness made her uniquely qualified to understand what people truly needed. Under her guidance, the foundation didn't just provide temporary shelter but comprehensive support, job training, mental health services, addiction treatment, and pathways to permanent housing. 1 year after the accident, Alexander received a call from his neurologist. "There's an experimental treatment," the doctor explained. "It's shown promising results in cases similar to yours. It might help recover some of your lost memories." Alexander sat with the information for days, uncertain. Part of him wanted to know who he had been, to fill in the blank spaces. But another part feared what he might discover, that the cold, ruthless man everyone described was his true self, and his current happiness was merely the result of his injury. "What are you afraid of?" Lily asked when he finally shared the doctor's call with her. "That I'll remember and become him again," Alexander admitted. "The man who cared more about money than people. The man who would never have stopped to help someone like you." Lily took his hand. "The memories don't make the man, Alexander. What you do with them does." After much deliberation, Alexander agreed to the treatment. The procedure was non-invasive but exhausting, a combination of transcranial magnetic stimulation and memory retrieval exercises. For weeks, he experienced nothing but headaches and frustration. Then, fragments began to return. Disconnected scenes from his childhood. His mother's face. The smell of his father's pipe tobacco. His first apartment. The day he closed his first major deal. The memories came in no particular order, some crystal clear, others hazy and indistinct. Some confirmed what others had told him about his former self, his ruthless business tactics, his emotional detachment. But others revealed complexities no one had mentioned. He remembered donating anonymously to a children's hospital after reading about a young patient in the newspaper. He remembered sitting by his mother's bedside during her final days, reading her favorite poems aloud. He remembered the crushing loneliness that had driven him to work 16-hour days, to accumulate wealth as a substitute for connection. "I wasn't a monster," he told Lily after a particularly intense session. "Just, lost. Broken in ways I didn't understand." As more memories returned, Alexander began to integrate his past with his present. He reconnected with old friends, the few who had seen beyond his wealth to the person beneath. He visited places that had been significant in his former life, finding that some now held emotional resonance while others remained just locations on a map. The memories of Caroline were among the most difficult to process. He remembered their early days, the genuine affection, the shared ambitions. He also remembered the slow deterioration of their relationship, the way they had become strangers living parallel lives. With the perspective of his new self, he could see how they had both contributed to the failure of their marriage. 2 years after the accident, Alexander's foundation had helped hundreds of people transition from homelessness to stable housing. Lily had completed culinary school and opened a restaurant that doubled as a training program for people rebuilding their lives. And Alexander had found a balance between his business acumen and his newfound compassion, using one to fuel the other. On the anniversary of their first meeting in the public garden, Alexander and Lily returned to the same bench. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't lost your memory?" Lily asked as they watched the swan boats glide across the lagoon. Alexander considered the question. "I think I was heading for a different kind of crash. The kind you don't walk away from, not physically, but spiritually. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters." "And what matters?" Lily asked, though her smile suggested she already knew his answer. Alexander took her hand, feeling the simple gold band he had placed there 6 months earlier. "This. Us. The chance to make a difference. The opportunity to be defined not by what I have, but by what I give." As they sat together in the fading light, Alexander reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He had lost a fortune in potential earnings by redirecting his business toward social impact rather than maximum profit. But he had gained something far more valuable, a life of purpose, of connection, of love. The millionaire had indeed lost his memory. But in that loss, he had found his humanity. And the homeless girl who had changed his life forever had, in turn, been changed by him. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a foundation not of concrete and steel, but of compassion and understanding. A home not defined by walls and a roof, but by the hearts that dwelled within it. In the end, it wasn't about what Alexander had forgotten, but what he had remembered, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in moments of genuine connection and lives transformed. And by that measure, he was richer than he had ever been.